My name is Valerie Morgan. I am 68 years old, but there are moments that live inside me so vividly that they still feel like yesterday. One of them is the day my brother dragged me by the hair across my own living room floor, in front of my children, and my sister filmed it. It was a Sunday afternoon in the summer of 1986. I remember because the sun was blazing through the front window, catching in the dust motes that floated in the air as if time itself had slowed. My two kids, Rachel and Matthew, were sitting cross-legged on the rug, coloring in their books. I'd been folding laundry, half listening to the hum of the box fan in the corner, when the sound of heavy footsteps on my porch made my chest tighten. I knew that stomp anywhere. He never knocked like a guest. He barged like an intruder, as if every house belonged to him. Before I could reach the door, it slammed open, rattling the frame. "Val!" he bellowed, his voice sharp with the anger I'd grown up fearing. Behind him, drifting in like a shadow with a smile, came Lila. Camera slung around her neck. She always had it, always pointing it at people like a weapon. "Dean, not now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady for the kids' sake. But it didn't matter. When Dean was angry, nothing mattered. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "You think you can talk about me behind my back?" he snarled, his breath hot, his face inches from mine. I didn't. Before I could finish, his fist tangled in my hair and yanked. The pain shot through my scalp, white-hot. I cried out, stumbling as he dragged me forward. My legs buckled, my feet scraped against the rug. "Mommy!" Rachel screamed. "Stop!" Matthew's small voice cracked, but he was only 8. What could he do? I clawed at Dean's arm, desperate to break free, but his grip tightened. My vision blurred with tears as he hauled me toward the center of the room, my children frozen in shock, their crayons rolling across the floor. And then I heard it. The click of a camera. I twisted my head, wincing at the pain, and saw Lila standing there, cool as ice, raising the camera to her eye. She was filming. "Lila!" gasped. "Stop! Help me!" But she didn't lower the camera. She tilted her head, smirking. "No one's gonna believe you, Val. Might as well let them see the show." Blick. The betrayal cut deeper than Dean's grip. My own sister, the one I had defended when she dropped out of school, the one I had loaned money to when she couldn't pay rent, the one I had kept secrets for, was filming my humiliation. Dean finally let go, shoving me to the floor. My scalp burned, my breath came in ragged gasps. I looked up to see Rachel clutching Matthew, both of them crying, their faces pale with terror. And Lila. She kept the camera steady. The room felt like it was spinning, my body aching, my mind reeling. This wasn't just an attack. It was a spectacle. And my own blood had made me the star of it. I scrambled to my knees, my chest heaving, my children clinging to me. For a moment, Dean and Lila loomed over me like giants, his rage and her smirk pressing down on me. Something inside me broke that day. Not just the trust between siblings, not just the sense of safety in my own home, but the illusion that family, no matter how flawed, would protect you when it mattered most. Because in that moment I realized the truth. They didn't want to protect me. They wanted to own me. And if they couldn't own me, they'd destroy me. As Dean stormed out, muttering threats, and Lila lowered her camera with a satisfied sigh, I felt the vow rise up inside me like fire in my chest. They thought they had power because he had fists and she had a lens. But they were wrong. I would take that camera. And when I did, I would take everything they thought made them untouchable. Before we move on, take a second to hit subscribe and drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think so far. People like to tell you blood is thicker than water. That family, no matter how difficult, will always be there for you. I used to believe that. I clung to it, even when every part of my life showed me otherwise. Dean, Lila, and I grew up in the same small house on the edge of town, the children of a factory worker and a tired seamstress. Money was always tight, tempers were always shorter than the rent, and the air in our home was heavy with both love and resentment. Dean was the oldest. From the start, he was the one who demanded space, demanded respect, demanded control. He was loud, reckless, and always seemed to get away with it. If he broke something, my mother sighed and cleaned it up. If he lashed out, my father shook his head and said, "Boys will be boys." Then came Lila, younger than Dean but meaner in her own way. She learned quickly that she didn't need to shout to hurt someone. She could twist words like knives. She could make you question what you saw, what you knew, what you felt. Lila was the master of small cruelties. Cutting remarks said sweetly, secrets whispered into the right ears, lies told with a smile. And then there was me, the youngest. Quiet, eager to please, desperate for peace in a house where peace never lasted. I learned to be invisible, to keep the peace when Dean yelled, to let Lila have the last word, to smooth over what couldn't be fixed. From the outside, we looked like any other family. Neighbors saw us playing in the yard, heard us laughing sometimes. They didn't hear the slammed doors, the threats muttered under breath, the nights when silence sat at the table heavier than any meal. The cracks were always there. When I was 10, Dean pulled my hair so hard in the kitchen that I fell into the counter. I cried out, clutching my head, but my mother only said, "Don't start fights you can't finish, Valerie." Dean smirked, triumphant. When I was 12, Lila borrowed my diary, read it aloud to her friends, and laughed when I begged her to stop. When I told my father, he just shrugged. "Don't write down things you don't want others to see," he said. Each time the message was clear. Dean and Lila could do as they pleased. I was the one who had to endure it. By the time we were teenagers, Dean's temper had grown into something dangerous. He'd punch holes in walls, slam fists on tables. His voice could shake the whole house. And if you stood up to him, if you dared push back, his fury was quick and brutal. Lila, meanwhile, discovered her weapon of choice. A second-hand Polaroid camera she bought at a yard sale. At first, it seemed harmless. Photos of the family at cookouts, snapshots of us sitting on the porch. But soon it became her tool for control. She snapped pictures of me when I cried, of Dean when he was furious, of neighbors when they looked foolish. She hoarded those images, flashing them at just the right time, threatening to show everyone if she didn't get what she wanted. It wasn't just a camera. It was power. And she knew it. I remember once, when I was 16, she caught a photo of me arguing with Dean. He was red-faced, towering over me, while I looked small, cornered. She waved the photo like a trophy. "See, Val. Proof you're always the victim. Proof you can't handle anything." No one asked why Dean had cornered me in the first place. They just laughed at the picture. Looking back, I see how the patterns set in. Dean with his fists. Lila with her lens. Me with my silence. I left home as soon as I could, marrying young, determined to build something different for myself and my children. But family has a way of dragging you back, even when you think you've escaped. Holidays, birthdays, obligations. The Morgans always circled around each other, no matter the cost. And every time I felt the old cracks beneath the surface. Dean barking orders, Lila snapping photos, me swallowing the lump in my throat for the sake of keeping the peace. Until that day in 1986, when the cracks became canyons. When Dean dragged me by the hair across my own living room. When my children watched in horror. When Lila, camera steady, smirked as she filmed. That wasn't the start of the betrayal. It was the climax of years of smaller ones. Years of being silenced, mocked, twisted. Years of knowing my siblings would rather break me than let me stand. But something else began that day too. As I clutched my children in the aftermath, my scalp burning, my body shaking, my eyes burning with tears, a thought took hold. They've used fear and shame as weapons all our lives. But shame only has power if it stays hidden. What if I could turn it against them? And in that thought was the first spark of the plan. I didn't know exactly how yet. I didn't know when. But I knew this. The camera Lila used to mock me would one day be the tool I used to destroy her. Hang on, before I tell you what happened next, make sure you've subscribed and left your thoughts in the comments. This part gets intense. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? For days after that Sunday, I couldn't walk into the living room without feeling my scalp burn again. The rug, the overturned laundry basket, even the crayons scattered under the couch, they were reminders. My kids couldn't look at the doorway without flinching. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw two things: Dean's hand in my hair and Lila's camera flashing. If Dean was brute force, Lila was the archivist of my humiliation. And she didn't stop with that day. The week after, she showed up at my door, smug, dangling her camera like a trophy. "Got it all," she said, smirking. "Proof that you can't handle your own family. People ought to know who you really are." I slammed the door in her face, but my hands trembled for hours afterward. 'Cause I knew Lila. She wouldn't keep the tape for herself. She would use it, show it, spread it. That's when the idea came. If her camera was her weapon, then taking it would be mine. At first, it was just a spark, a desperate thought in the middle of the night while my kids slept curled beside me. What if I turned the tables? What if I made her lens work for me instead of against me? But sparks, when fed, become fires. I began watching. Whenever Lila visited, I noticed how she carried her camera like a queen carries a scepter. She recorded everything: birthday parties, cookouts, even casual evenings at the diner. She'd lean back in her chair, smirk and say, "Smile. You never know when I'll need this." People laughed nervously. They let her. That was her power. She had everyone convinced that she controlled the story. But I knew the truth. Stories can be rewritten. The first step was access. I waited for the right moment. The day Lila got careless came sooner than I expected. She stopped by one evening, crowing about a new editing machine she'd bought secondhand. She bragged about how she could splice clips, cut and paste, make anyone look like a fool. She left her camera bag in the hallway while she strutted into the kitchen to show my mother her shiny toy. My pulse pounded. I wanted to snatch it up, run, hide it forever. But I didn't. Not yet. Because revenge is sweeter when it's public. Instead, I quietly unzipped the bag, slid out one of the tapes, and tucked it under my sweater. It was heavier than I imagined, the real cool against my skin. My hands shook as I zipped the bag closed and walked calmly back to the living room, praying she wouldn't notice. She didn't. That night, after the kids were asleep, I loaded the tape into my neighbor's old player. My breath caught as the screen flickered. And there it was. Me on the living room floor, hair tangled, face contorted with pain, my children crying in the corner. Dean looming, Lila filming. Had to pause the tape. My stomach heaved, bile rising. I pressed my hands to my face and sobbed. But then I pressed play again. 'Cause I realized something. This wasn't just humiliation. This was evidence. It wasn't me looking weak. It was them looking monstrous. And if the town could see this, if neighbors, friends, anyone could witness what Lila captured, then their power would vanish. The second step was preparation. I copied the tape, quietly, carefully, using the neighbor's old machine. I made 3 versions. One I hid under the loose floorboard in my bedroom. Another I placed in a safety deposit box at the bank. The third I kept close, tucked behind cookbooks in my kitchen. Then I returned the original to Lila's bag the next time she wasn't looking. She never suspected. The third step was choosing the stage. I knew it had to be public. It had to be undeniable. Something bigger than whispers or accusations. And then it came to me, the annual community showcase. Every summer, the town gathered at the community center for what they called Talent and Pride Night. People brought pies, kids sang songs, old men played fiddles. And at the end they showed films, local footage, home videos, anything residents submitted. It was always Lila's favorite night. She loved having her clips played on the big screen. Her name called as people applauded. It was perfect. I would use her stage to end her reign. The weeks leading up to it, I rehearsed in my mind. Not what I'd say, but how I'd stand. How I'd face her when the footage rolled. How I'd hold my children's hands in the audience, showing them what strength really looked like. The fourth step was endurance. Because Lila didn't stop. She needled me with her camera, with snide comments. Dean kept his distance for a while, but his shadow still hung over me. The kids grew quieter, clingier, sensing the tension. There were nights I doubted myself, nights I wanted to give up and burn the tapes instead of using them. But then I'd look at Rachel and Matthew, their young eyes still haunted by what they'd seen, and I knew I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let their lesson be that violence and cruelty win. The fifth step was secrecy. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends. Not neighbors. Not even my children. The risk was too great. One slip, and Lila would catch on. She'd destroy the tape, twist the story, spin it back on me. So I carried the plan like a secret flame. Hidden but burning, waiting for the right night. And when the showcase was finally announced, when the flyers went up around town, when I heard Lila boasting about the footage she had ready to wow them all, I knew it was time. Had the tape. Had the stage. And soon I would have her camera. Real quick. Subscribe and share your thoughts below before we get to the part that still makes my heart race. The night of the community showcase came thick with summer heat. The town square buzzed with chatter as families filed into the community center, the scent of peach cobbler and fried chicken drifting in from the food tables outside. Kids darted between the rows of folding chairs, their laughter echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling. I sat near the middle with Rachel and Matthew beside me. Their small hands fidgeted nervously in their laps, though they didn't know why I'd brought them. I hadn't told them what I was planning. All they knew was that Mama had said, "Tonight, you're going to see something important." At the front of the room, the old projector had been set up, its reels gleaming under the light. A makeshift stage stood nearby, where townsfolk would sing or recite poetry before the films played. Pride Night, they called it, the night when the whole town celebrated itself. And as always, Lila was in the center of it all. She strutted in wearing a dress too loud for the occasion, her hair piled high, her camera slung around her neck like a crown jewel. She made sure everyone saw it, touching it lightly as she laughed with neighbors, dropping hints about the surprises she had planned for the screening. Dean came too, of course, swaggering behind her. His shirt stretched tight across his chest, his smirk daring anyone to challenge him. The two of them were a pair, brute force and smug control, and for years this town had let them get away with it. But not tonight. I watched as Lila delivered her reel to the man running the projector. She whispered something to him, then glanced back at the crowd with a smirk. She was sure she owned the night. And that's when I stood. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady though my knees shook. "I'd like to submit a reel too." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The projector operator frowned, but I held up the tape, its label blank. "It's short," I said firmly. "But it matters." He hesitated, then nodded. I felt Lila's eyes burn into me as I returned to my seat. Her smirk faltered, her mouth opening slightly as if to object, but she didn't. She couldn't. Not without looking petty in front of the town. The evening unfolded. Songs sung, pies praised, poems recited. My heart raced with every act, my palms damp with sweat. Rachel leaned against me, Matthew squeezed my hand, and still I said nothing. Finally the projector whirred to life. The screen flickered, showing grainy clips of children playing, neighbors waving, families laughing at cookouts. The audience chuckled, pointed, whispered. Then Lila's reel began. Shots of her laughing with friends, catching neighbors at awkward angles, zooming in on imperfections and quirks, turning ordinary people into the butt of her jokes. The crowd laughed politely at first, but unease grew. I saw a neighbor shift uncomfortably, another frown. And then my reel. The screen flickered again. The room hushed. There I was on the living room floor, Dean's fist tangled in my hair, dragging me as Rachel and Matthew cried in the corner. My sobs filled the room, raw and unfiltered. And behind the camera, steady as stone, was Lila's voice. "No one's gonna believe you, Val." The audience gasped. The image froze on me, crumpled on the rug, my children clinging to each other, terror etched on their faces. A silence fell heavier than stone. Then the whispers began. "That's Dean. Oh my God, is that Lila's voice? She filmed it. She just stood there." Lila shot to her feet, her face white. This is taken out of context," she shouted, her voice shaking. "Context?" A woman in the front row demanded, her voice sharp. "Your brother is dragging Valerie by the hair, and you're filming it." All eyes turned to Dean. His smirk was gone, replaced by fury and panic. He shoved his chair back, pointing at me. "You set us up." "No," I said, standing slowly. My voice trembled, but the truth gave it strength. "You set yourselves up. You thought violence and silence would protect you. You thought humiliation was power. But your own camera," I pointed at Lila's neck, at the black strap she clutched like a lifeline. "Your own weapon just destroyed you." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted. Old friends shook their heads in disgust. One man stood and barked, "Get out!" Another woman hissed, "Shameful!" Dean shoved his way toward the door. His face twisted with rage, but no one moved aside quickly. He had to fight through the crowd, their voices pelting him with condemnation. Lila stayed frozen, her camera trembling in her hands. For once, no smirk, no clever words. Just the realization that the power she had wielded all her life had been ripped away in an instant. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. With a steady hand, I reached out and unhooked the strap from around her neck. She didn't resist. The camera slid into my hands, heavier than I expected, warm from her grasp. For the first time in decades, I felt taller than her, stronger. I held it up for the crowd to see. "This," I said, "has been used to shame and control. But tonight it gave us truth. And truth doesn't belong to Dean or Lila. Belongs to me. To my children. To everyone they've tried to break." The applause wasn't loud at first. It began as a few claps, then spread, growing into a roar. The entire room stood, neighbors nodding, tears in some eyes, voices rising in agreement. Rachel and Matthew clung to me, their faces wet with tears but shining with pride. For the first time since that awful day, they looked at me not with fear, but with faith. The Morgans' reign of fear was over. As I left the hall that night, the camera heavy in my hand, I felt the air shift. The silence that had once suffocated me was gone. In its place was something stronger, louder, truth. They thought fists and film made them untouchable. My brother thought his rage was power. My sister thought her camera gave her control. But cruelty doesn't last. The same tape they wanted to use to break me became the evidence that destroyed them. That night, I didn't just take back my voice. I showed my children that silence isn't survival. Truth is. If this story moved you, if you believe no voice should be buried under fear, then join me here. Subscribe to the channel, share these stories, and help make sure every story of survival becomes a story of strength.